The most dangerous part of sleeping in a frozen trench was not always the cold you could feel, but the cold you failed to notice until your body stopped answering properly. A new soldier might think survival meant being tough enough to endure the night. But the older men knew better. They watched the mud, the wind, the socks, the collar, the canteen, and the way a tired body slowly made foolish choices. Every small mistake could wait quietly until dawn. Tonight we follow an old soldier teaching a new one how to sleep in a trench without letting the cold take too much before morning. The new soldier came down into the trench as if the only thing left in the world was a place to sit. His shoulders were low, his knees bent with every step, and the mud held his boots just long enough to make him angry at the ground. He had carried his pack all day. He had bent under orders, waiting, digging, and the dull weight of fear. By the time darkness settled over the line, he was not thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like a tired boy who wanted the nearest flat patch. I stopped him before he lowered himself, not because I enjoyed ordering him around, but because I had seen what happened when a man trusted the first bit of ground that looked useful. In a winter trench, sleep did not begin with closing your eyes. It began with looking at the place that wanted to steal heat from you while you were too tired to argue. He looked at me with the impatience of a man who believed tiredness should excuse stupidity. I understood that look. I had once given it to another older soldier. The first cold nights teach a man how little his body cares about pride. A trench floor can look harmless in the dark. Then it presses down, water rises through the mud, and the place chosen for rest becomes a slow drain under the back, hips and legs. So I made him look. There was water sitting in the lowest part of the trench, black under thin ice. There was snow packed against one wall, ready to melt into cloth as soon as a body leaned near it. There were boards half buried in muck, a torn sack under broken timber, and a higher patch near the wall where the wind did not run as freely. None of it was good. Some of it was simply less bad. Of course, the trench did not care how tired he was. It only cared how quickly it could make him cold. That was the first thing a new man had to learn. You did not choose a sleeping place because it looked comfortable. You chose it because it had less water, less wind, less direct contact with frozen ground, and enough cover that the cold had fewer ways to enter your clothes. Comfort belonged to beds, rooms, and houses with doors. Out here, the best place was often only a dirty corner that would harm you more slowly. I pointed at the ground with my boot and made him notice the slope. Water always finds the lower place. Melted snow followed the same rule. Mud that looked level could hold cold water under its surface. A man who slept in that low patch might not wake dead, but he could wake stiff, shaking, slow, and useless. Morning did not wait for a man to feel ready. Orders came, whether his legs obeyed or not. The new soldier shifted from one foot to the other. His face showed that he wanted me to finish. That was another danger. When a body is exhausted, every small step feels like an insult. Moving a board, brushing snow from a coat, lifting a pack out of water, checking the wind, fixing a collar, all of it feels unnecessary until the shaking begins. Once the shaking's strong, the hands lose skill. A knot becomes hard, a strap becomes confusing. That is why I made him prepare before he sat. The body cools quickly after work stops. During the day, digging and carrying can hide the cold. Fear can hide it too. But once a man is still, sweat inside the shirt turns against him, wet wool presses close, and the ground begins pulling warmth through every place that touches it. The cold does not need to be dramatic. It only needs time. In a warm room today, a man may complain about the wrong blanket, but in that trench, a torn sack under the back could be the difference between standing up at dawn and being dragged upright by someone else. He bent and pulled the sack free. It was stiff, dirty, and ugly. He did not like touching it. I had no patience for that. Clean things were rare at the front. Useful things mattered more. I made him put the sack over the worst mud. then slide a board under the place where his hip would rest. It would not make him comfortable. It would only keep his body from lying straight against wet ground. That was enough. Next came the wind. He had not noticed it properly. New men feel the wind on the face and forget the gaps at the neck, wrists, waist and ankles. I turned him toward the wall that gave more cover. I made him pull his collar closer, keep his hands inside when he could, and set his pack where it blocked a small draft near his side. These were not clever tricks. They were plain habits learned after watching men suffer from ignoring them. The new soldier finally lowered himself, slowly this time. He was still tired, his feet still hurt, his stomach was still half empty, his eyes still wanted to close before the night had properly begun. But now his pack was out of the water, his rifle was within reach, the snow was brushed from his coat, and his body was not pressed straight into the coldest patch of ground. He had not beaten the cold. No one beat it. He had only made it work harder. I think the hardest lesson for a young soldier was that survival often looked small, dirty and unimpressive. There was no glory in choosing better mud. Men learned by watching mistakes, then passing the warning to the next tired face. That was how I taught him to begin the night. Not by telling him to be brave, and not by pretending the cold could be ignored. I taught him to look before he rested, to prepare before his hands became clumsy, and to treat sleep as work that had to be done correctly. In winter, a soldier did not simply lie down, he arranged his chance of waking. That night showed him that sleep in a trench was never just sleep. It began with mud, water, wind, and the small choices made before the body cooled too far. And once he understood why the ground could not be trusted, he was ready to learn why the thin layer beneath his back mattered more than comfort itself. The new soldier still believed the cold lived mostly in the air. I saw it in the way he pulled his coat tighter around his chest and tucked his chin down, as if the wind above us was the only thing worth fearing. He found the higher patch brushed away snow and was already ready to lie down. To him, that seemed sensible enough. His coat was closed. His hands were close. He thought the worst part was handled. I stopped him again. He looked at me with irritation again. A man can accept one correction when he is tired. The second one feels personal. His legs were shaking from the day. His stomach had little inside it, and his back wanted the ground so badly that any delay seemed cruel. But the ground was exactly what I wanted him to distrust. I pressed my boot into the mud where his hip would go. It looked firm, but water pushed up around the sole. I made him watch it. Then I tapped the frozen plank beside it. It sounded solid, but the top was wet and cold enough to pass that chill through cloth and coat all night. A new soldier thinks a hard place is only uncomfortable. An older soldier knows it can become a slow thief. The ground does not need to be deep, sharp, or dramatic to hurt a man. It only needs to stay cold longer than he can stay warm. I told him to find something to put under himself, not for comfort. If he thought we were building a bed, he would waste time. We were trying to put one poor layer between his body and the thing that wanted his heat. Straw branches, torn sacks, paper, cardboard, a rain cape, rags, a broken board. Anything dry enough to make space was better than a coat pressed into mud. He looked around as if nothing there could help. They saw rubbish. Old soldiers saw material. A crushed box could go under the shoulder, a scrap of sack under the hips. A few twigs could keep cloth from laying flat in wet soil. Even a thin layer mattered because the body lost heat fastest where it was pressed against something colder than itself. The back and hips suffered first because they carried the weight. I sent him to pull loose straw from a torn packing bundle near the wall. Some of it was damp, so we shook it out and kept only the drier middle. Then we took 2 short boards and laid them unevenly over the worst mud. A perfect arrangement was not possible. A useful one was enough. He wanted to lie down before we finished. I made him wait until the sack sat over the boards and the straw was spread under his spine. At home now, people add another blanket because the room feels chilly. But in that trench, the first question was whether the earth itself was touching too much of you. When he finally lowered himself, I made him rise once more. He cursed under his breath, but he stood. The sack had shifted, and one hip would have ended up on wet mud. That small mistake could have kept one side of his body cold for hours. A man asleep does not adjust wisely. He turns, presses deeper into the bad place, and wakes only after the damage has already begun. I had seen men rise at dawn with one side stiff, one leg slow, and their faces grey with anger. The body is not built to argue with frozen ground forever. At first, it sends warnings. The back aches, the skin burns, the muscles tighten. Then the warnings become ordinary because everything else hurts too. A soldier tells himself it is only discomfort. He does not move because moving means effort, but the cold keeps working under him. By morning, he may be stiff, clumsy, and slow when a shout comes down the trench. That was the part the new soldier did not yet understand. The lining under the back was not about sleeping well. Nobody slept well there. It was about still being useful after a bad sleep. An army could order men to move at dawn, whether their clothes were wet or dry, whether their feet felt alive or not, whether their backs had been lying against mud all night. War did not pause to ask how the ground treated you. He lay down again more carefully this time. His body was still tense, but the layer held. Told him not to crush it flat if he could help it. Keep the pack on one side. Keep the board under the hip. Do not let the coat slide into the mud. If he had spare paper, put it where the shoulder pressed hardest. If he found more straw later, save it. A small thing under the body could be more useful than a larger thing thrown over the top. Nearby, another young man had already made the mistake. He had dropped himself onto wet planks without checking them. By morning, his coat would be soaked through at the back, and everyone would call it bad luck. Often, it was only a tired decision paid for slowly. I think that was one of the cruelest lessons of trife. A man could suffer badly from something that looked too small to matter. No one made speeches about it. The old men corrected the new ones, sometimes roughly, because gentleness took time, and time was short. We taught them to lift themselves off the ground with whatever the war had left lying around. Dry rubbish was not rubbish. Warmth was not only held by coats and blankets, but also protected by space, layers, and staying out of direct contact with wet earth. The new soldier closed his eyes at last, but not fully. He had learned enough to remain uneasy. That was good. Uneasy men checked things. Comfortable men trusted too much. His back rested on sack, straw, and boards instead of mud. It was a poor shelter, but it gave his body a chance to keep some of its heat until morning. That night taught him that the cold below could be worse than the cold above. A thin layer under the body was not comfortable. It was a small delay against the earth, taking warmth hour after hour. And once he understood that, he was ready to learn why a narrow place out of the wind mattered more than a wider place to stretch his legs. A new soldier usually noticed space before he noticed wind. He looked along the trench for a place where he could stretch his legs, lean his back, and lower himself without pressing too hard into another man's pack or knees. After a day of carrying weight and standing in cold mud, that was easy to understand. His body wanted room. His hips wanted less pressure. His legs wanted to stop folding under him. So when he saw a wider spot near the bend of the trench, his face changed a little, as if he had found something close to mercy. I stopped him before he took it. He looked tired of being stopped. I did not blame him. A new man thinks each correction is another piece of rest being stolen from him. He had already learned to check the ground. He had already dragged a sack and a board under himself. Now he thought he had earned the right to choose a place where his knees did not touch his chest. But a winter trench did not reward fairness. It rewarded noticing what could hurt you while you were still awake. That wider place looked better because it was easier to enter. It had more room, less rubbish underfoot, and enough open space for a man to lie straighter. But the wind moved through it from the broken end of the trench, slipped past the sandbags and ran along the floor. It did not strike hard. That was why a new soldier ignored it. A loud wind frightens any fool. A quiet draught is the one that teaches him later. Of course, the trench was always willing to offer a wider place, as long as that place helped the cold reach more of you. I made him stand there for a moment without moving. At first, he only shrugged. Then the air touched his ankles where the trouser cloth had lifted. It found the small opening at one wrist when he lowered his hand. It moved under the edge of his coat and cooled the damp cloth near his knees. When he turned his head, it reached the back of his neck. That was enough. He understood, not fully, but enough to stop arguing with his eyes. Wind does not need much space to work. It only needs a gap and time. A collar left loose, a sleeve pulled back, a waist opening, a boot top exposed, a neck turned the wrong way. All of these become little doors. The body warms the air trapped under the clothes, and then the moving air steals it. The man tightens himself. He shifts. He pulls one part closed and opens another. After a while, he thinks he is just uncomfortable. He does not see that he is losing warmth every minute. I pointed him to a narrower place against the trench wall. It had 2 slumped sandbags, a broken box, and another man's pack near one side. It looked cramped and ugly. It did not let a man stretch properly, but the wind passed over it more than through it. A soldier could turn his body inward there, put his back toward the wall, block one side with his pack, keep his collar tight, and hide his hands near his chest. That was a better place, even if it looked worse. In a normal room, a man may choose the wider corner because it feels easier, but out there, a cramped corner could keep him warmer than a clean open patch. He lowered himself into the narrow place and immediately disliked it. His knees had to bend. His shoulder touched the wall. His pack pressed against his side. He looked at me as if no man could sleep that way. I told him he was not there to sleep like a man at home. He was there to rest without giving the wind a straight road through his clothes. That was all we were trying to do. I made him turn his body again. Not that way. More inward. Keep the open side covered. Pull the collar before settling, not after. Push the sleeve down over the wrist. Do not leave the hand hanging outside. Keep the ankle covered where the trouser leg has climbed. Put the pack near the gap by the hip. If another man lies close enough, use the space between bodies, but do not push him into the mud. These were not clever tricks. They were small habits learned by men who had spent too many nights waking up colder than they should have been. A few yards away, another young soldier had chosen the wide place earlier. He kept lifting one shoulder and turning his face from the draft. Every time he moved, his coat opened somewhere else. His hands came out. His collar loosened, his legs shifted and let the air reach his ankles again. He was not doing anything foolish on purpose. He was only tired, and tired men like the place that asks least from them at first. By morning, that choice would ask for payment. The body pays in simple ways. Fingers stiffen, feet lose their quick feeling, the neck tightens, the back shakes harder. A man becomes slower when someone calls him. He wastes time pulling at clothes he should have fixed before sleeping. He gets angry because anger is easier than admitting he ignored the wind. Then he learns, if the night is kind enough to leave him able to learn. I think the wind was so dangerous because it made a man weaker without leaving anything obvious to point at. That was why old soldiers watch walls, bags, wreckage, roots, packs and bodies. Anything that broke the air mattered. We used fallen timber, torn canvas, a dead bit of brush, a helmeted shoulder, the side of a cart, the hollow behind a collapsed wall, anything that stood between the sleeping man and the moving cold. We did not call it comfort. We called it having a little sense before the night made us stupid. By the time the new soldier settled again, he had less room than he wanted, but the air no longer ran straight across him. His knees were bent, his collar was up, His wrists were covered and his pack blocked the worst gap near his side. He was not happy. Happiness had no place in that corner, but he was less exposed, and that mattered more than being able to stretch his legs. That night taught him that a wide place could be worse than a cramped one. The wind did not have to roar through the trench. It only had to find sleeve, collar, ankle, and neck for long enough to carry warmth away. By the time he learned to turn his body away from the draft, he was ready to learn why the way a soldier curled himself mattered more than looking as if he were truly asleep. A new soldier tries to sleep the way he remembers sleeping at home. Even in a trench, with mud under him and cold air above him, his body still searches for something familiar. He lowers himself, stretches one tired leg, shifts his shoulder, and tries to make the shape of a man in a bed. I watched this one do the same thing. His face tightened when his back met the cold wooden boards. He did not understand at first. To him, the next step was simple. Lie down, close your eyes, and steal whatever sleep the night allows. But a winter trench did not let a man sleep like that without taking payment. The way a body lay mattered as much as the place beneath it. He stretched his legs again, because tired legs want length. He let one arm fall away from his chest, because tired shoulders want release. He lowered his chin only halfway, because his collar felt enough. A new man always tries to make the trench copy a normal room. The trench always refuses. Of course, the knight was not impressed by how badly he wanted to rest like a human being. I made him draw his knees in, close enough that the legs were not lying long in the cold air. I made him bring his hands toward his chest, not leave them hanging near the mud. I made him tuck his chin down and close the coat around his neck. He looked smaller at once. Less comfortable, maybe, but less open. That was the point. A man loses heat from every place he exposes to the air. Arms left out cool quickly. Legs stretched flat expose more cloth to the wind and damp. A neck left open lets the cold reach a place the body feels at once. Hands away from the chest come slow, then clumsy. When a man curls in, he is keeping the warmer parts of himself close and the weak points covered. The new soldier shifted and complained under his breath. I heard it but let it pass. Every new soldier thinks the old ones love discomfort. They do not. We hated discomfort too. We only knew which discomfort could be survived. A bent knee and a tight shoulder were small costs. Lying open until the shaking became strong was a larger one. In a warm house today, a man changes position to sleep better, but there we changed position so the body would not spend the night losing warmth faster than it could make it. I showed him with my own body. Knees in, elbows close. Hands near the chest or under the armpits began to stiffen. Chin down, collar up, coat pulled close before lying still. Do it before sleep, not after. Once hard shaking starts, every adjustment comes late. A man will promise himself he will fix the sleeve in a minute. Then the minute passes and the cold uses it. He tried again. This time, he looked less like a sleeping man and more like someone guarding something inside his coat. That was closer to the truth. In the trench, a man guarded his heat the way he guarded ammunition, water, and dry socks. None of it felt important until it was gone. Nearby, an older soldier sat curled almost double, helmet low, shoulders raised, hands hidden. But that old soldier would rise faster in the morning than the man who slept stretched and proud. The body that gives away less warmth has more left when the shouting starts. The new soldier watched him, then looked back at me. That helped. Men trust what they see after they are too tired to trust advice. He pulled his knees closer. He tucked one hand inside his coat and put the other near his rifle. I nodded. A soldier still had to be ready. He could not bury both hands so deeply that waking became a struggle. That was the balance, and he had to learn it quickly. The cost of the wrong posture did not always show at once. At first, the man only felt exposed. Then the shaking spread from the back into the legs. The hands tightened, the jaw worked. Sleep came in broken pieces, and each waking felt colder than the last. By dawn, he might not be frozen, but He would be slower when ordered. I think the cruel thing about trench sleep was that even rest had to be done with discipline. There was no private comfort down there. Each man made himself small beside other small men, all trying to keep a little warmth under worn cloth. Nobody looked noble. Nobody looked peaceful. Men slept with knees bent, backs sore, helmets low, rifles close, hands hidden, faces grey under the rim. They looked like workers storing their bodies for another day. That was what I wanted the new soldier to understand. Do not sleep wide. Do not offer your arms and legs to the air. Do not leave the throat open because you are too tired to pull the collar. Do not mistake a familiar position for a safe one. In a trench, the best shape was often the one that looked least like sleep. He finally settled into the cramped posture and stopped fighting it. One knee touched the sack under him. His shoulder pressed into his coat. His chin stayed low. His hands remained close. It was not comfortable. It was defense. That was how the cold taught him, not with a shout, but with a body that stayed warmer because it had made itself small. A soldier in a winter trench did not curl up because he was weak. He curled up because every inch left open gave the air another chance to take warmth from him. By the time he learned to guard his own shape in the dark, he was ready to understand why the feet had to be checked before the eyes closed. Most new soldiers notice the parts of the body that complain loudest. He rubbed his hands, lifted his shoulders, pulled the coat tighter around his chest, and thought those places were the problem. I saw him doing that after he had settled into the cramped shape I showed him. He thought he had done enough. I told him to look at his feet. He looked annoyed because his feet were not the first thing he felt. That is common with new men. Hands sting. Shoulders ache. The chest feels the wind. But feet can go quiet in a more dangerous way. Wet feet, tight boots, twisted socks, and cold trapped around the toes do not always shout at first. Sometimes they become numb, and a numb foot can fool a tired man into thinking the trouble has passed. I made him pull one boot where he could see it. The leather dark with moisture. The laces were pulled too tight from the day's walking because his feet had swollen inside them, and he had not noticed. He had wanted to sleep with everything still clenched, as if tightness meant safety. It did not. Of course, a boot could look like protection while quietly turning a man's own foot into a useless lump by morning. I told him to loosen the laces a little. Not enough for the boot to slip off. Not enough to make him slow if an alarm came. Only enough to let blood move. New soldiers often touching the boot at night because they had heard warnings about never removing them in the cold. That warning was true, but it was not the whole lesson. Keeping boots on did not mean letting them squeeze the life out of the feet. He worked at the knots with slow fingers. I made him warm hands under his arms for a moment. A man with stiff fingers can make a simple lace worse. Then he tried again. The lace gave. The boot loosened slightly. He sighed, and that small sigh told me his foot had been trapped more tightly than he knew. I made him check the sock next. He did not want to. Nobody wanted to inspect feet in the dark, in mud, with cold hands and a body begging for sleep. But a sock bunched under the toes could rub the skin raw. A wet sock could hold cold water against the foot for hours. A sock frozen stiff at the edge could make each step worse in the morning. It was only necessary. At home today, sore feet might mean a chair and dry socks, but in that trench, sore feet meant wondering whether you could still stand when someone shouted for the line to move. He found dampness near the toes. Not soaked through, not enough to frighten him, only damp. That was how many bad things started. A small wet patch, a tight boot, a man too tired to care. I told him to use a dry scrap if he had one. He had folded a dry scrap inside his coat. Good. He had listened once. He asked with his face whether that small cloth mattered. I pointed to an older man sitting nearby, rubbing one foot with both hands, his face flat and tired. He had ignored wet socks before. Now each morning began with pain. That was enough. Feet are not only for warmth, they are for obeying the next order. A man can be brave, angry, faithful, or afraid, but if his feet do not carry him, all of that stays in the mud. The army spoke often about courage. It spoke less about swollen toes, numb soles, cracked skin, and boots that would not go on when dawn came. Yet those small injuries could decide whether a man reached the next ditch or fell behind. I told the new soldier not to chase comfort. Do not strip the foot bare unless there is a real need. Do not leave the boot open too far. Do not put a wet sock back against the skin if a dry scrap can help. Do not sleep with water inside the boot. Do not trust numbness. Numbness is not relief. It is a warning that has gone quiet. He listened better now. His tiredness had not left, but his attention had sharpened. That happens when a man realizes the lesson is not about being fussy. It is about having legs that answer in the morning. He loosened the other boot slightly, checked the cloth, tucked the trouser leg so cold air did not run straight inside, and made sure his feet were not lying in the lowest wet patch. I think the saddest thing was how often a man's survival depended on caring for details he was too exhausted to care about. No officer needed to see this. No report would mention it. Along the trench, old soldiers passed these habits quietly because they had seen what bad feet did to good men. An army could talk about strategy, maps, and attacks, but one soldier still had to keep socks from freezing against skin. The new soldier finally tucked his knees close again. His boots were still on, but not strangling him. His socks were still poor, but not pressing wet cloth everywhere. His feet were not warm in any pleasant sense. They were simply less likely to betray him at first light. In a trench, that counted as success. A bad night often began at the toes before the man understood it. That night taught him to check his feet before trusting sleep. Hands, shoulders, and chest might complain louder, but wet or trapped feet could decide whether he stood up when morning came. Only after he learned that boots had to protect without crushing him did the harder question appear, because taking them off in the cold could become a mistake he might regret at dawn. After the new soldier checked his feet, he began doing the thing every tired man wanted after a long day on frozen ground. He reached for his boot as if the problem had an easy answer. His feet hurt. His toes felt pressed together. The leather felt stiff and too tight around the ankle. In his mind, taking the boots off meant relief, and relief was the nearest kindness left. I stopped before he pulled the first lace free. He looked at me with anger. I understood. After hours of walking, a boot can feel like a trap. The foot swells inside it, the sock bunches, the heel rubs. The toes push against cold leather until a man wants to tear everything loose and let the feet breathe. A new soldier calls for rest. An older soldier thinks of the morning. The night was cold enough that bare feet would lose heat quickly, even inside socks. The trench was wet and crowded. A boot taken off could fill with mud, freeze stiff, slide out of reach, or become impossible to put on if the foot swelled. That was not a small inconvenience. When the order came to move, a man did not get extra time because he wanted comfort. Of course, the army could lose patience faster than a frozen boot could soften. I told him to loosen the boot, not remove it. There was a difference, and new men often missed it. A lace eased at the ankle could let blood move and reduce the worst pressure. A boot pulled off completely opened a new problem. The foot cooled, the sock chilled, the leather tightened in the cold, and the man risked spending dawn fighting with his own equipment while others were already standing. He muttered that his feet were burning. That happens after too much walking. Pain can feel hot even in freezing weather. I told him that pain was not permission to do the first foolish thing that promised relief. If there was a real injury, bleeding skin, a twisted sock cutting into the toes, water pooling inside the boot, then the foot had to be dealt with. But dealing with it did not mean leaving it bare to the night. I made him work carefully. Loosen the laces a little. Lift the heel just enough to ease the pressure. Check whether water has collected inside. Feel the sock without stripping everything off. If he needed to adjust his clothes, do it quickly and keep his feet covered as much as possible. Keep the boot close, under the coat edge or between the knees if needed. Never toss it aside as if he were in a barracks. In a house today, taking off your shoes means the day is over, but in that trench, it could mean the morning had already become harder. He watched another man down the line struggle with exactly that lesson. The man had pulled one boot off earlier and fallen half asleep with it beside him. During the night, mud had worked around it, the leather had stiffened, and his sock had gone cold. He was awake now, rubbing his foot, trying to force it back in without making a sound. His face was tight with pain and embarrassment. Nobody mocked him. We had all learned some lessons badly. The new soldier saw enough. He stopped pulling at the boot and loosened it with care. His face still showed disappointment. He had wanted the simple pleasure of freeing his feet. War often took even that. It did not only take sleep, food, warmth, and privacy. It took the small habits that told a man the day had ended. Removing shoes belonged to ordinary life. In a trench, the day did not end. It only became darker. A foot left too cold can betray a man in quiet ways. The toes grow numb first, then the ankle stiffens. Then the skin rubs worse when the boot returns. If swelling increases, the leather that came off with effort may not go back on without pain. A man can panic then, because the rest of the line is preparing to move, and he is still fighting with one boot in the mud. That fear was not a theory to me. I had seen a young man near Smolensk spend a cold dawn trying to force a swollen foot into a frozen boot while the order to move passed from mouth to mouth. He was not cowardly, he was not lazy. He had simply chosen relief at night and paid in front of everyone in the morning. He marched late, limped badly, and spent the day falling behind. I think one of the meanest parts of soldiering was how often comfort came disguised as a trap. So I told the new soldier the rule plainly. Do not remove the boots in deep cold unless the foot truly needs treatment. If you must remove one, keep the other on, work fast, keep the boot warm enough to stay usable, and never let the foot remain exposed longer than necessary. Relief that lasts a few minutes can cost hours. Sometimes it costs the ability to stand when standing is no longer optional. He settled back, boots still on, laces eased just enough. He hated it, but he understood more than before. His feet were not comfortable, only safer. In a trench, that difference mattered more than his mood. A boot left on could be painful, but a boot removed carelessly could become a problem larger than pain. That night taught him that rest was not always a sense of relief. A soldier might want his feet free, but the cold could turn that small comfort into swollen skin, stiff leather, and lost time at dawn. Once he learned why boots stayed on through bad sleep, he was ready to understand why one dry pair of socks hidden close to the body could matter more than almost anything else he owned. Once the new soldier learned why the boots stayed on, he thought the matter of his feet was finished. His laces were loosened, his boots stayed on, and his body had settled back into the cramped corner beside the trench wall. For a few minutes he looked almost satisfied, the way a tired man looks when he believes he has obeyed enough advice for one night. Then I asked him where his dry socks were. He stared at me as if I had asked for a clean tablecloth. That was the usual look. New soldiers understood rifles, ammunition, food and water before they understood socks. A sock seemed too ordinary to carry the weight of survival. It was something from home, something washed by a mother or hung near a stove. Out here after mud, rain, snow, sweat and hours of marching, wet socks felt like one more misery among many. That was why they were dangerous. Of course, a new soldier could survive shellfire all afternoon and still be humbled at night by a wet piece of cloth around his toes. I told him to reach inside his coat. If he had listened earlier, he would have kept a dry pair there, close to the body, not buried in a pack where damp could find it. He hesitated, then pulled out a folded scrap of cloth and one spare sock. Not a full clean pair, but something. I nodded. A dry scrap was better than pride. Wet socks do not simply feel unpleasant. They hold cold against the skin and keep holding it. The foot warms the moisture for a moment, then the cold returns and stays. The toes begin to lose feeling. The sole tightens, the ankle stiffens. Soon the whole body feels colder because the feet never stop sending trouble upward. A man may blame the wind, the ground, the coat, or hunger. Sometimes the real problem is inside his boot. I made him loosen one boot just enough to work. Don't take it off fully. Do not expose the foot to the night longer than needed. He had to check where the sock was wettest, whether the cloth had bunched under the toes, and whether the skin had started to rub. His fingers were clumsy, so I told him to slow down. Hurry makes a tired man tear things, drop things, or leave them worse than before. At home today, a dry sock is a small comfort, but in that trench it could feel like the only civilized object left in the war. He found the sock damp near the front, cold at the heel and stiff with mud near the edge. He wanted to pull it away in disgust, but I made him work carefully. If the spare was dry enough, put it on. If not, slide the driest scrap under the sole or around the toes. If he had paper, fold it and use it as a short layer, not because paper was good, but because direct wet cloth against skin was worse. We used whatever stayed dry. He asked if one dry layer truly mattered. I did not answer at first. I pointed down the trench where an older man had tucked his feet under his coat while he rubbed life back into his toes. His face had that flat look men get when pain has become boring. He was not making a scene. Men rarely did. They only sat there, working their feet with both hands, knowing morning would not wait. Cold feet change the whole night. They keep a man awake, then make his sleep broken and shallow. They make him curl harder, which stiffens the knees. They make him tuck in too tightly, which traps damp cloth against the body. They make him slow when he needs to stand, slow when he needs to climb, slow when he needs to run. An army can talk about courage, but courage still needs feet that feel the ground. I had learned to keep dry socks close under the coat because the body was the only stove we carried. A spare buried deep in a pack might not stay dry. A sock tied outside could freeze, soak, or disappear. A scrap kept near the chest might remain usable. It might smell bad, feel rough, and look like nothing worth protecting. Still, it could save the feet from one more hour of wet cold. I think the saddest equipment in a trench was often the most ordinary, because only misery taught a man its value. The new soldier tucked the damp sock away, where it would not soak the dry scrap. He did not throw it aside. Wet things could sometimes be dried later, or used somewhere less important. Waste was easy when a man was miserable, but misery was exactly why he had to stop wasting. The front trained men to respect ugly little items. A piece of cloth, a folded paper, a strip of sack, a dry corner inside the coat. He settled back again with one foot slightly better than before. Not warm, better. That was often the whole achievement. One foot is less wet, one toe less numb, one layer between the skin and the cold cloth. The difference would not impress anyone in a story about battle, but it could decide how a soldier rose when the morning order came. A dry sock did not make the trench kind. It only kept one part of the body from surrendering too early, which was sometimes all a tired man could ask from the night. That night taught him that wet socks were not a small complaint. They kept cold pressed against the feet until the whole tired body struggled to warm itself again before morning. Fool. Only after he learned to guard one dry piece of cloth inside his coat could he finally understand why snow on the outside of a uniform was less dangerous than snow, melting quietly into the places he forgot to check. Snow looked simple to the new soldier. It lay on the trench edge, gathered along the sandbags, sat white on his sleeves, and clung to the lower part of his coat. He brushed some of it away with the back of his glove, but only where he could see it easily. To him, snow was outside the body. It was on the ground, on the wall, on the helmet, on the shoulders. It looked cold, but it also looked harmless enough if a man did not lie directly in it. I stopped him before he settled down. He gave me that tired look again, the one that asked how many small things an old soldier could care about before letting a man sleep. I did not answer it. I reached behind his neck and knocked snow from the fold of his collar. Then I brushed the edge of his sleeve, the top of his boot, the inside crease near his knee, and the corner of the coat where white crystals had gathered against the cloth. He watched the snow fall and frowned, as if I was wasting strength on dirt. That was what new men missed. Snow was not the real trouble while it stayed snow. The trouble began when it melted. Of course, the snow was polite enough to look clean before it turned into cold water against the skin. I told him to check every place where the cloth opened or folded. Collar first, then sleeves, then the top of the boots, then trouser cuffs, then the blanket edge, if he had one. Snow caught in those places did not stay outside for long. Body heat softened it. A damp cloth held it. A small patch of wetness began near the neck or wrist, and after a while the man felt colder without knowing exactly why. He rubbed the back of his neck after I cleared it. The cloth there was already damp. Not soaked, not enough to frighten him, just damp enough to matter. A little water at the neck can make the whole body tense. A wet cuff can chill the hand. Snow melted into a boot edge can travel down into the sock. A damp blanket corner can press cold through the coat all night. These were not large disasters. They were small openings. The new soldier had spent the day walking through snow and mud. He thought wetness was already everywhere, so one more patch did not matter. That is how tired men begin to lose. When everything is bad, they stop separating bad from worse. But winter punished that laziness. There was a difference between a damp cloth outside the coat and melted snow sliding into the place where the shirt touched skin. At home today, a bit of snow on a sleeve might be brushed away at the door, but in that trench there was no door, no stove, and no dry room waiting behind it. I made him stand and shake out the edge of his coat. He did it badly at first, so I made him do it again. Not hard enough to waste energy, not so careless that he dropped his gloves, just enough to remove what would later melt. Then I made him run his hand along the collar, not for neatness, but to feel what the eyes missed. The fingers found a small lump of snow tucked under the fold. He looked at it longer than he needed to. That was good. A lesson stays better when the hand finds it. I told him to clear the boot tops next. Snow around the ankle is easy to ignore. The boot looks strong, and the trouser leg seems to cover it, but melted snow can slide down, soak the sock, and sit there until the toes begin to lose feeling. A man may blame the cold ground, the wind, or his poor sleep. Sometimes the night began with snow he was too tired to brush away. He bent slowly and cleaned the boot edges. His fingers were stiff, so the work annoyed him. That was always the problem. The right time to fix these things was before sleep, when the body was already demanding sleep. Later, when the cold had entered, he would have less patience and worse hands. A soldier had to do small work when every part of him wanted to stop. I remembered a young man from an earlier winter who had slept with snow packed in the fold of his coat near the shoulder. Nothing dramatic happened. He did not die in the night. That almost made the mistake easier to dismiss. But by morning, his inner layer was damp, his shoulder shook, and his hand on that side moved more slowly. When the order came, he spent the first minutes fighting his own clothes instead of standing cleanly with the others. I think the meanest cold was the one that entered through something a man had seen but not respected. Along the trench, old soldiers brushed themselves without thinking. Collar, sleeves, boot tops, cuffs, blanket edge. The movement became ordinary. Nobody called it clever. Nobody praised it. It was just another that separated a man who might rise ready from a man who woke angry, wet, and slower than he should be. In war, many useful lessons looked too small for a story, but they mattered more than a grand speech. The new soldier finally sat down again. This time he checked his sleeve before tucking his hand close. He cleared his collar before lowering his chin. He looked at the boot edge before drawing his knees in. He was learning not to trust the outside of things. A coat could look covered but safe. A boot could look sealed but not be. A blanket could look helpful while carrying snow into the body's own warmth. Snow outside the trench was only part of winter. Snow inside the clothing became water, and water close to the skin was a different enemy. That night taught him that snow was not harmless just because it looked soft and clean. Once it melted into the collar, cuff, boot edge, or blanket fold, it became cold water carried straight into the places a tired man forgot to protect. From there, the lesson became harder because even the heat made by his own body could leave sweat behind and turn against him before morning. Hard work can fool a new soldier into thinking he is warmer than he really is. I saw it after we had been digging at the trench wall, lifting boards, shifting wet sacks and clearing snow from the edge. The new soldier's breath came hard. His face was damp. His hands had stopped shaking for a while. To him, that felt like safety. He pulled his coat tight, wrapped himself as heavily as he could, ready to settle down as if more cloth always meant more warmth. I told him to wait. He looked at me with the same tired anger as before. He had moved enough to feel heat. His arms were no longer stiff. His legs felt alive again. A new man trusts that feeling because it arrives so clearly after a cold. He thinks the body has finally won a little ground. He does not yet understand that warmth made by work can leave trouble behind once the work stops. I made him open his coat just enough to check the inner layer. Not wide, not careless, only enough to feel for the cloth near his chest and under his arms. It was damp. He did not want to admit it. Sweat seemed too small a thing after snow, mud and wet ground. But a damp cloth against the skin did not care whether the water came from the sky or from the body. Of course, the body had a cruel habit of saving a man from the cold for 10 minutes, then leaving him wet enough to suffer for hours. That was the lesson. Do not wrap yourself too tightly after a hard movement. Let the worst heat settle. Close the coat enough to stop the wind, but do not trap fresh sweat under every layer. If the inner shirt is damp, shift it when possible. Pull the cloth away from the skin for a moment if you can do it safely. Change nothing wildly. Do not stand open to the air like a fool. Just give the body a chance not to turn its own heat into cold water. He touched the cloth near his ribs and finally understood. The wetness was not dramatic. It was only a thin, damp patch. That made it more dangerous, because a tired man could ignore it. Once he lay still, that patch would cool. The coat above it would hold it close. The wind outside would press through gaps. The back would tighten, the chest would chill, and soon he would wonder why he felt colder after working than before. In a warm house today, sweating means you change a shirt or open a window. But in that trench, it meant choosing carefully before your own clothes turned against you. I told him to loosen the coat for a short moment, while he was still kneeling in the sheltered corner. Keep the collar ready. Keep your hands close. Do not let snow fall inside. Then close the outer layer again, but not so tightly that the damp cloth has no chance to breathe. If he had a dry scrap, keep it near the worst wet place. If he had no dry scrap, at least do not press the wet patch flat against the skin under the pack strap. He obeyed more quickly now. His anger had not gone, but experience was beginning to work on him. A new soldier becomes teachable when small mistakes start making sense in his own body. He had felt wet socks. He had felt wind under the collar. Now he felt sweat cooling under the shirt. They were the same lesson told by different parts of the body. Men often got this wrong after labour. Digging warmed them. Carrying timber warmed them. Running a short distance under fear warmed them faster than any fire. Then they stopped, wrapped themselves tight, and sat in the dark with sweat trapped inside. For a while, they were grateful. Later, they shook harder than before. The body that had felt strong during movement became cold as soon as stillness returned. I remembered an older corporal who used to make men wait before settling after heavy work. They cursed him softly. just as this new soldier had cursed me. But the men who listened woke less soaked, less stiff, less angry at dawn. The ones who wrapped themselves like bundles while still sweating often spent the night fighting their own shirts. I think it was a bitter thing that even warmth had to be handled carefully, because war could turn almost every comfort into another problem. No officer wrote orders about that in any useful way. It passed from man to man in dark corners, through hands pulling collars, through men telling others not to be stupid with their coats. The army could provide discipline, but the trench provided the real instruction. It taught that dry mattered more than thick, that timing mattered more than panic, and that warmth without care could leave a man worse later. The new soldier finally settled down again, less tightly wrapped but better arranged. His outer coat blocked the wind, his collar was ready, his damp shirt was not pressed flat under every strap. He was still cold, tired, and still sitting in a place no one would choose willingly. But he had not trapped fresh sweat against himself and called it protection. Sweat was just another kind of water once the body stopped moving. That night taught him that more layers were not always the answer. A man had to keep warm without sealing damp cloth against his own skin after work, because sweat could cool like rain once he sat still. The harder lesson came when no fire could be risked, and the warmth of the men beside him became one of the few quiet things left to use. Fire was the thing the new soldier wanted most. Once sweating stopped and the cold returned. I could see it in his eyes when he looked toward the rear of the trench, where a man might imagine a small flame hidden behind boards or canvas. He did not ask for much, not a stove, not a room, not a real fire like at home, just a little heat for the hands, a glow to tell the body that the night was not made only of mud and breath. I told him to forget it. He looked at me as if I had taken away the last decent thought in his head. That was how new soldiers often felt about fire. They saw warmth first. Old soldiers saw light, smoke, smell, sparks, and the way a careless glow could point a line straight toward men who wanted to stay unseen. A fire could warm your fingers and invite trouble at the same time. Of course, the enemy did not need much help finding cold men who were kind enough to light themselves for him, so we used what was left: bodies, coats, packs, corners. The new soldier did not like that lesson. He wanted a little space to himself, because after a day pressed among men, orders, mud, fear, and sting, he thought privacy would feel like rest. I understood that too. A man gets tired of elbows, knees, shoulders, breath, and another soldier's coat touching his own. But the trench did not give privacy without taking warmth in return. I made him move closer to the men beside him, not on top of them, not careless, close enough that the warmth trapped between bodies did not disappear into the open air. Shoulder near shoulder, knees drawn in. Packs are used to block the exposed side. Coats pulled so they overlapped a little, where it made sense. If one man had a better corner, he did not waste it by spreading out alone like a lord in a bedroom. In a normal house today, sleeping too close to another man might feel awkward, but in that trench, the space between bodies could decide whether a hand still worked at dawn. He shifted in, stiff with embarrassment. New soldiers still carried the habits of ordinary life. They wanted a boundary around the body. They wanted to feel that sleep belonged to one man alone. The trench taught otherwise. When fire was forbidden, men became part of each other's shelter. One blocked the wind for another. One shared the edge of a coat. One warmed the next when his sleeve opened or his head dropped into a worse patch of cold. I showed him where to place his pack. The open side had to be blocked first. Then the shoulders, then the knees. Leave enough to reach the rifle, but not enough room for the wind to run between bodies. Keep the coat close. Do not breathe into the cloth until it turns wet. Do not push a sleeping man into the mud. These things sounded small because they were small. That did not make them unimportant. The young soldier finally settled between two older men. He looked less alone and less comfortable at the same time. That was usually how the right answer felt. His shoulder touched one coat, his pack touched another, and the broken wall took the wind on the far side. No one spoke much. Talking wasted energy and sometimes carried farther than a man expected. The warmth there was very quiet, poor and human. A body gives off heat even when the man inside it feels frozen. One body alone loses it quickly. 2 or 3 men close together can slow that loss. It is not magic. It does not make the trench warm. It only keeps the night from taking everything too fast. The new soldier slowly learned this with his own skin. After a while, he stopped pulling away from the men beside him. A soldier who still dreams of clean sheets may find that humiliating. There were no clean sheets. There was no private room. There was a line of men sitting close to the mud because the alternative was colder. That was one of the plain ways war reduced a person. Not with a wound, not with terror, sometimes by making him grateful for another man's shoulder near his own. Years later, what stayed with me was how quietly men learned to accept closeness they would once have found unbearable. Along the trench, the same arrangement appeared everywhere. Men who did not know each other well sat near each other because the cold made strangers useful. A coat edge became shared. A sheltered hollow became a common thing. If one man shifted, the others felt it. If one man shook hard, someone might nudge him awake or tell him to tuck in tighter. Nobody called that kindness too loudly. It was simply how a group stayed useful until morning. The new soldier understood a little more that night. He had begun by looking for his own place to sleep. Now he was learning that survival in winter often belonged to the group before it belonged to one man. No fire, no stove, no safe light. Only bodies, cloth, mud walls, and the discipline not to waste what little warmth they made together. The fire he wanted would have been easier to understand. The warmth beside another man was less proud, but safer. That night taught him that a soldier could not always choose warmth that looked comforting. When fire meant smoke and danger, the bodies beside him became a small shelter the enemy could not see so easily. After that, he still had to learn a harsher rule, because even a shared coat or rain cape could become a problem if the layer closest to the skin was already wet. A tired soldier will put anything over himself if it looks like it might help. I saw the new soldier reach for a rain cape that had been lying near the trench wall, dark with mud along one edge and wet across the middle. He lifted it with both hands and tried to pull it over his shoulders, as if one more layer could only be good. That is how a new man thinks in the cold. More cloth means more warmth. More coverage means more safety. More weight on the body must be better than the open air. I stopped him before he wrapped it tight. He looked at me as if I had finally become unreasonable. He had kept his boots on. He had checked his socks. He had brushed snow from his collar. He had learned not to lie in the wind. Now I was stopping him from using the one thing that looked like a blanket. His patience was almost gone, and I did not blame him. Cold makes every correction feel like an insult, but a wet cloth is not always a shelter. Sometimes it is only cold carried closer to the body. Of course, the trench was full of things that looked useful until they touched the skin long enough to prove otherwise. I made him feel the inside of his coat first, then the shirt under it, damp but not soaked, cold but still better than the rain cape. That was the order he had to understand. The layer nearest the body mattered most. If that layer was wet, everything above it could trap the wetness in place. If the outer layer was wet and pressed close, it could pass cold down into the clothing instead of keeping it away. He did not like that answer. A man wants the simple rule, cover up and be warmer. War rarely allowed simple rules to remain simple. A dry inner layer, a wind-blocking outer layer, a poor lining under the body, and then extra covering if it did not bring water with it. That was better than throwing every available cloth on top and hoping weight would solve what dampness had started. I told him to shake the rain cape out first, not wildly. not where it would scatter mud onto the men beside him, just enough to see which part was wet, which part was less wet, and which edge could be used as a shield rather than a blanket. If he threw the wet middle straight over his chest, he would feel protected for a few minutes. Later, when the cold settled through it, he would understand too late. In a warm room today, any extra cover may feel like kindness, but in that trench, a wet cover could become another cold thing, lying on top of a tired man. He turned the cape in his hands and finally noticed the difference. One side was slick with water. One edge was drier, stiffer, but usable. I showed him how to put the drier side outward and use the wet part away from the chest, more as a windbreak than a blanket. Keep it from pressing into the shirt. Keep space where possible. Do not let it drag into the mud and then call it protection. If he had a sack or board beneath him, keep that in place too. Warmth was not one layer, it was the way all the poor layers work together. The new soldier tried to arrange it. At first he pulled everything too tight because tightness feels secure. I made him loosen it slightly where the wet cloth pressed against his ribs. He frowned, but listened. A tight wet layer can chill a man faster than loose dry air trapped under a coat. That was one of those things the body learns better than the mind. Once felt, it is remembered. I had seen men make this mistake with blankets, rain capes, ground sheets, and coats, borrowed from another man. They found something heavy and believed the night had improved. Then the damp spread, their inner clothing cooled, their backs shook harder. They woke angry and confused, wondering why the thing meant to save warmth had made them colder. The answer was usually simple. They had covered themselves with more wet and trapped it near the only warmth they had. A few feet away, one man had hung a wet blanket over his shoulders like a roof, keeping most of it off his body with his pack and rifle case. That was better than wrapping it close. Another man had made the mistake of folding a damp cloth under his side. He would feel it later. Maybe not enough to scream, enough to lose sleep, enough to stand badly at dawn. The new soldier watched them both. He was learning to see differences that had been invisible on his first night. Dry and wet, wind block and body layer, cover and trap, dirt that mattered and dirt that did not. The trench did not become kinder when a man learned these things. It only became slightly less confusing. The hardest lessons were usually the ones that looked too small to deserve fear. I told him to remember the order. Keep the inside as dry as possible. Keep the body off the ground. Block the wind. Then add what you can without bringing more wetness to the skin. If something is wet, use it carefully. If something is dry, protect it like food. Do not let panic pile cloth over cloth until the body is wrapped in cold. No one outside that trench would have called this skill. They would have seen a dirty soldier fussing with rags, sacks, capes, boards, and a coat that no longer looked fit for any proper uniform. But this was how men lived through nights that did not care about uniform pride. A soldier did not stay warm because he did not have enough clothes. He stayed warmer because he learned where each piece belonged. The new soldier finally settled under the arranged cape. It did not look neat. It did not look comfortable. But the wet part was not pressed against his shirt. The drier edge shielded the wind, and the layer beneath his back still held him off the mud. He had not gained warmth as much as he had prevented another loss. That was often the real work. A blanket could help a man. A rain cape could help him. A coat could save him. Used badly, any of them could become a cold weight. That night taught him that more covering was not the same as better warmth. The layer closest to the body had to stay as dry as possible, or every blanket and cape above it could hold cold in place instead of keeping it out. Once he understood that warmth depended on order, not just thickness, the small gaps at wrist, neck, ankle and collar began to matter even more. Small gaps were easy for a new soldier to ignore. He only fixed his clothes when the cold came in clearly enough to make him curse. If wind struck his face, he turned away. If his hands stung, He tucked them under his arms. If his chest felt cold, he pulled the coat tighter. But the smaller openings did not trouble him at first. A loose cuff, a lifted trouser leg, a gap at the collar, a bit of neck showing under the helmet. To him, those were details for a cleaner life. I made him check them anyway. He was already half settled under the arranged cape, with the drier edge turned out and the wet part kept away from his shirt. He thought that should be enough. I pointed first to his wrist. The sleeve had ridden up while he worked, leaving a narrow strip of skin between glove and coat. It was not much, that was why it mattered. A new man waits for a large problem. Winter often uses a small one. Of course, the cold did not need a doorway when a crack at the wrist had been left open for it. I made him pull the sleeve down and tuck the glove edge under it. Then I checked the other side. The same mistake. A man fixes the part he sees and forgets the matching place on the other side of his body. I told him to do both before sleeping, because after sleeping, he would not remember evenly. Next came the collar. He had pulled it up earlier, but while shifting his pack, it had fallen open near the throat. He did not feel it sharply yet, because his chest was still warmer from movement. That would change once he lay still. Cold the throat and back of the neck makes the whole body tighten. It also wakes a man again and again, not enough to save him, only enough to ruin rest. In a warm room today, a loose collar is nothing, but in that trench, a finger width of open skin could keep stealing warmth until morning. I made him lower his chin, raise the collar, and turn the cloth so the wind had no straight path inside. Then I checked the back of his neck. Snow, damp cloth, and moving air liked that place. Men forgot it because they could not see it. I had forgotten it once, and by dawn my shoulders were stiff as wood, not from a wound, not from bravery, from a stupid little gap I had been too tired to close. He reached back with one hand and felt the space under his helmet. Good. I wanted him to learn by touch. In darkness, the eyes were poor servants. The fingers had to find what the eyes missed. Neck, collar, sleeve, waist, ankle. Each one had to be checked before the body gave up and called it sleep. His ankles were worse. The trouser cloth had climbed when he curled his knees, and the top of one boot showed more than it should. Cold air could enter there, cool the sock edge, and creep toward the foot. He pulled the fabric down. I told him to do it again after he changed position, because every movement opened something. That annoyed him, but it was true. A sleeping man shifts without thinking. He curls tighter, loosens a sleeve, drops a hand, raises a knee, and exposes the waist where coat and trousers meet. The night does not need him to make a new mistake. It can wait for him to undo the old corrections at his sleep. Nearby, an older soldier sat with his hands buried, collar tight, scarf twisted badly but effectively around his neck. He looked ridiculous, like a bundle of worn cloth with a helmet on top. He would also be warmer than the young man who tried to look less foolish. Looking neat was not the same as staying alive. Men learned very quickly that dignity had little value if it left the neck, wrists, and ankles open to the wind. The new soldier finally began checking himself without my finger pointing every time. Wrist, collar, neck, waist, ankle. He moved slowly, but he moved in the right order. That was enough. I told him to check once more before closing his eyes, and again if he woke cold. Do not wait for shaking. Do not wait for numbness. Close the gaps while the hands still work. No one outside the line would have praised that. A man sitting in mud, fussing over cuffs and trouser legs, did not look heroic. But the trench did not care about heroic shapes. It cared about exposed places. Warmth escaped quietly from small openings, and the body paid for each one later. He settled again, smaller and tighter than before. His collar was up, wrists covered, ankles hidden, chin low, hands close. He still looked miserable. He was supposed to. But the cold had fewer little roads into him now, and that was the best we could give him before the night broke into fragments of sleep and waking. One open gap could seem harmless because it did not hurt enough at first. That night taught him that small openings could drain warmth for hours without announcing themselves loudly. A wrist, a neck, an ankle, or a loose collar might look unimportant, but each one gave the cold a quiet path into the body. Once he learned to close those paths before sleep, the next lesson was weighting his empty stomach. Because a man also needed fuel if he expected his body to make heat through the night. Food was easy for a new soldier to misunderstand at night. He thought of it as a meal, and because there was no real meal, he often treated the little he had as useless. I watched him sit with his knees pulled close, collar tight, wrists covered, boots still on, and one hand resting near the small rash in his coat. He was too tired to open it. His face had that blank look men get when hunger has gone quiet for a while. I told him to eat something. He looked at me as if I had asked him to celebrate. That was common. A new soldier waited for hunger to speak loudly before he answered it. If his stomach hurt, he ate. If it did not, he saved the food or ignored it. But cold changes the meaning of food. At night, a few bites were not about pleasure. They were not about feeling full. They were a way of giving the body something to work with while the trench kept taking heat away. He pulled out a hard biscuit first. It was dry, rough, and not enough to make any man happy. Good enough. Then, a small piece of chocolate cracked the edge from the cold. He looked at it too long, perhaps thinking he should save it for later. Later was a fine word until the body had to pass through the night first. Of course, the army had a talent for giving a man just enough food to make hunger more organized, not kinder. I told him to eat slowly. Do not chew like an animal and make the stomach turn. Do not drop crumbs into the mud. Do not drink all the water with it if the canteen is nearly gone. Take enough that the body has something to burn. A cold night with an empty belly feels different. The shaking comes easier. The mind grows duller. The body searches for heat and finds nothing stored but fatigue. He broke the biscuit with his fingers. They were stiff, so the piece snapped unevenly and fell into his palm. He ate it without interest. Food at the front often lost the meaning it had at home. There was no table, no lamp, no clean hand reaching across to pass bread. There was only a man trying to get something dry into his mouth while mud pressed against his boots, and another man slept close enough for their shoulders to touch. In a warm kitchen today, a snack before bed may be a habit, but in that trench, a few bites could decide whether the body had enough strength to keep making heat. He took the chocolate next. That made more sense to him. Sweetness still had a way of speaking to tired men, not loudly, not like comfort, but enough to remind the body that it had not become only cold and cloth. I told him not to eat everything if he had more. Keep something for waking. Keep something for the hour before dawn if possible, but do not protect the ration so carefully that the body suffers while the food stays safe in a pocket. That was another mistake new men made. They saved food because supplies were uncertain, then sat through the cold with nothing inside them. Saving mattered. So did spending at the right time. A biscuit in the pocket could not warm a man unless he ate it. A bit of meat or cold soup could be ugly and still useful. Even a small swallow gave the body work to do. I had seen men refuse food because they were too tired to care. They leaned back, closed their eyes, and let the night take them into shallow sleep. Later, they woke shaking harder, angry without knowing why. They blamed the wind, the wet, the boards, the boots, and the thin coat. Often, all of that was true, but the empty stomach had joined the enemy without making any noise. The new soldier chewed more carefully now. His face did not brighten. This was not a scene from a warm camp. He was still miserable, but his body had been given a small chance. A soldier in winter had to think of the body like a poor stove. It did not make heat from bravery. It needed fuel, and the fuel was often dry biscuit, cold meat, a spoon of thick soup, a bit of chocolate, or whatever could be swallowed before sleep stole the will to bother. A man sitting quietly with food in his hand could look almost foolish until morning proved whether he had been wise. Down the trench, another soldier had saved his rations for too long. He sat with his arms folded, lips and eyes half open. He was not starving in the dramatic way civilians imagine from a distance. He was simply too empty for the cold he had to face. That was enough. War often harmed men in plain amounts. A little less food, a little more wet, a little less sleep, a little more wind, until the body stopped forgiving the arithmetic. I told the new soldier to tuck the rest where it would not freeze too hard or fall into the mud. If there was soup, keep the tin close enough that it did not become a block before he could use it. If there was meat, cover it. If there was a biscuit, break it before the fingers got worse. Think before sleeping. The body would not think well later. He nodded, not because he was grateful, but because he was beginning to see the pattern. Everything had to be done before the cold took away the easy movements. Check the ground, block the wind, guard the feet, keep a dry cloth, close gaps, eat before the emptiness becomes another kind of cold. The body forgave less in winter than a young soldier wanted to believe. No officer needed to explain that with a map. The trench explained it through shaking hands, hollow stomachs, and men who woke weaker than they should have been. Food was not only a ration, it was time bought against the cold. Not much time, never enough, but sometimes enough to reach dawn. The new soldier finished the last small piece I allowed him, then tucked the rest inside his coat. His face still looked tired but less vacant. That was good. He had not eaten a meal. He had given his body a little work for the night. That night taught him that food before sleep was not about comfort or fullness. A few hard bites could give the body something to burn while cold ground, wet cloth and moving air kept taking warmth away. After that, the canteen near his side began to matter too, because frozen water could leave a man thirsty when he most needed to stay awake. Water was easy to forget until a man needed it. The new soldier had eaten the little I told him to eat, tucked the rest of his ration inside his coat, and settled again with his knees pulled close. His canteen was lying near his pack, not far away, but not close enough either. To him, that seemed sensible. It was within reach, and it was not pressing into his ribs while he tried to rest. I picked it up and put it against his body. He looked at me as if I had started guarding every object he owned. That was not far from the truth. In a winter trench, a careless thing could become a useless thing before morning. A canteen left against frozen ground, shoved into a wet corner, or hanging out in the open, could turn from water into a hard weight. A new soldier thinks water is water as long as he still owns the bottle. An older soldier knows frozen water is only a promise he cannot drink. Of course, the cold was willing to ruin even the things a man had been careful enough to save. I told him to keep it near the body if he could, under the coat edge, inside a pocket close to the ribs, tucked between the pack and the side, anywhere that borrowed a little heat without making him too uncomfortable to sleep. Not every canteen could be kept warm. Not every night allowed good choices. But placing it badly was foolish when a better place was still possible. He shook it once and heard the water move. That sound mattered. By dawn, if he left it exposed, he might hear nothing but ice inside. Then thirst would become another problem, sitting beside cold, hunger, wet socks and stiff hands. The body did not stop needing water because the night was freezing. A man still breathed hard, sweated earlier, ate dry food and worked through fear. Cold air dried the mouth. Hard biscuit pulled at the throat. Fatigue made the head dull. In a warm room today, water beside the bed is only a convenience, but in that trench, a drinkable canteen could help keep a man awake and thinking clearly. I told him to take a small drink before settling fully. Not much. Do not empty it. Do not gulp until the stomach turns. Just enough to wet the mouth and help the dry food go down. The water was too cold, and he winced when he swallowed. That was another lesson. Water that is nearly frozen can make a man feel colder for a while, especially if he drinks too much at once. Small sips were better. He glanced toward the snow along the trench wall. New soldiers often did that. Snow looked like water lying everywhere, free and clean enough if a man was desperate. I told him not to start eating it just because his canteen was cold. If the body was already shaking, eating snow asked it to spend more warmth. Turning that snow into water, it might help the mouth for a moment and make the rest of him colder after. Besides, trench snow was rarely clean once men, mud, smoke and equipment had lived beside it. He looked embarrassed because the thought had already crossed his mind. That was all right. A thought does not kill a man. Acting on it without sense might. I had seen men wake with canteens frozen solid and anger in their faces, as if the night had personally insulted them. They would hold the bottle under a coat, against the belly, between the thighs, anywhere to soften it. Sometimes it worked slowly. Sometimes there was no time. An order came and the man had to move, thirsty, with ice knocking inside the metal like a joke. A canteen was not only water, it was patience, clear thinking, and one less weakness for the cold to use. A thirsty man becomes irritated faster, his mouth dries, his head feels thick, he handles equipment badly, he mistakes tiredness for courage and confusion for toughness, in a trench that could spread. One slow man made room harder for the man beside him. One careless bottle became one more small failure in a group already carrying too many. A soldier did not need a grand mistake to suffer. Sometimes one forgotten canteen was enough to make the night meaner. So I made the new soldier place it where his body could lend it a little warmth. Not directly against a wet cloth. Not where it would dig into him until he moved it in his sleep. Close enough to reach, close enough not to freeze quickly. Then I told him to remember it if he woke. Shake it. Sip if needed. Do not leave it lying in the mud after shifting position. A sleeping man endangers his own survival if he is not careful before sleep. He followed the instructions without arguing this time. That told me the night had begun teaching him faster than I could. He tucked the canteen against his side, under the coat, with the strap still reachable. His hand rested on it for a moment, as if he was surprised that water also needed protection. The trench did not attack only the body, it attacked everything the body depended on. That night taught him that water could be lost without being spilled. A canteen left too far from the body could freeze into a useless weight, while drinking too carelessly could make the cold feel sharper inside him. The next danger was sleep itself, because a man who slept too deeply might miss the cold, the water, or the warning that morning was coming hard. Deep sleep was what the new soldier wanted most. Not warmth, not food, not even a real bed by then. He wanted to disappear for a few hours. His feet had been checked, his collar closed, his canteen tucked near his side, and his body folded into the narrow place we had made for him. His eyes were already heavy. I could see him trying to let go of the trench, the cold, the mud, and the fear all at once. I told him not to sink too far. He opened one eye and looked at me, as if I had finally asked the impossible. Sleep was the only thing he still owned in his mind, and now I was warning him against that too. I understood the anger in his face. A tired soldier wants sleep the way a starving man wants bread. He does not want a good sleep. He does not want a listening sleep. He wants the kind that takes him away. But the trench was not a safe place to leave the body unattended. Of course, war was generous enough to exhaust a man, then punish him if he slept like exhaustion had any rights. I told him that old soldiers rarely slept all the way down, not because we were stronger, not because we had conquered fear. We slept lightly because the trench kept changing while a man was trying to rest. Water could creep under the hip, a boot could slide into mud, wind could shift after a bag settled, snow could fall into a collar, a foot could grow numb in a way that was not normal, a voice could come down the line, low at first, then sharper. A new soldier thinks waking is failure. An older soldier knows waking may be what saves the next hour. If he wakes and feels water under his side, he can shift before his coat soaks through. If he wakes and his toes have gone too quiet, He can move them before the morning makes the damage clearer. If he wakes and hears men stirring too suddenly, he can reach his rifle before panic reaches him. He did not like that. No one likes being told that even sleep must keep one eye open, but he had already seen enough that night to know I was not speaking for discipline alone. The cold did not pause because a man finally closed his eyes. It kept working through cloth, ground, wind, and small mistakes. In a warm bed today, deep sleep is a blessing, but in that trench, deep sleep could leave a man late to his own danger. I showed him how to rest without dropping everything. Rifle near the hand. The canteen is still closed. Feet tucked but not crushed, collar closed. One shoulder is not pressed into a wet cloth. If he woke, he should check the first thing that felt wrong before sleeping again. Do not lie there pretending the body is complaining for no reason. The body often knew before the mind agreed. He asked, half asleep, how a man was supposed to rest like that. I told him the truth. Poorly, that was how most men slept. Poorly, in pieces, with the neck stiff and the ears half awake. A few minutes here, a longer stretch there. A jerk woke from the cold. A hand is checking the rifle. A boat moved out of the water. A quiet curse. Then the eyes closed again. That kind of sleep did not feel like sleep to a new man. It felt like losing a fight slowly, but it kept him tied to the world around him. He could still hear the older man beside him shift. He could still feel if his own hip was getting wet. He could still wake when someone touched his sleeve. In the trench, that was better than vanishing into a deep hole and trusting the night to be kind. I remembered a soldier who slept heavily whenever he could. Everyone envied him at first. He could close his eyes in noise, cold and mud. Then one morning, water had risen around the place where he lay, and he woke soaked from one side down. He was not dead. That almost made the mistake look small. But he spent the next day shaking, slow, angry, and useless with his hands. Deep sleep had not saved him. It had only kept him from correcting the problem while the correction was still easy. A man who sleeps through too much can wake to find the night has already made decisions for him. The new soldier listened more quietly after that. His face softened into the tired seriousness of someone who had stopped hoping for comfort and started accepting rules. He was learning the shape of trench sleep. It was not peace. It was not an escape. It was a thin rest stretched between checks, noises, cold spots, and the need to be ready before the body stiffened too far. Along the trench, old soldiers looked asleep from a distance. Up close, they were not fully gone. One hand stayed near the weapon. Knees remained tucked, faces turned away from the wind. Men woke, adjusted, muttered, and slept again. Nobody slept like a child. Nobody trusted the dark much. The body can rest in pieces, but it must not be abandoned completely in a winter trench. I told the new soldier to sleep if he could, but not like a man in a house. Wake if his feet changed. Wake if water touched him. Wake if the wind shifted. Wake if the line moved. Wake if the man beside him shook too hard. It sounded impossible. Then the trench made it ordinary. He finally closed his eyes, but his hand remained near the rifle, and his body stayed gathered around its little store of warmth. That was enough for the moment. That night taught him that sleeping in a trench was never a true escape from the war. It came in broken pieces, light enough for a man to hear danger, feel cold, and correct small failures before they grew larger. Beyond his own shallow rest, another rule weighted over the whole group, because if everyone slept at once, the cold could move through them as quietly as any enemy. Nobody liked being the man who stayed awake. The new soldier learned that quickly. He had finally understood how to sleep lightly, how to keep one hand near the rifle, how to notice water under the hip, how to wake when the cold changed strangely. Now he thought his sleep was the main thing left to protect. He wanted his turn. He wanted the longest stretch he could get. He wanted to close his eyes and not be pulled back by another rule. I told him the group could not all sleep at once. He stared at me, worn out and almost offended. That was common. A new soldier counts sleep like a hungry man counts bread. Every minute feels stolen if someone asks him to give it away. But a trench was not a room full of beds. It was a place that changed while men were too tired to notice. The enemy needed watching. Yes, but the cold needed watching too. Water could rise slowly at the bottom of the trench. A wall could soften and drop mud near a sleeping man's legs. Snow could thicken along a coat edge. Wind could shift after a sandbag slumped. A man could shake too hard, then stop shaking in a way that should frighten everyone around him. These were not loud dangers. That was why someone had to stay awake enough to see them. Of course, the night was happy to wait until every exhausted man had trusted it at the same time. I showed him how the watch worked. One man stayed awake while the others slept in pieces. Not fully comfortable, not standing like a parade guard, but awake enough to listen and look. He checked the lower ground for water. He watched the men nearest him. He nudged a shoulder if someone slid into the mud. He told a man to tuck his hands back in. He passed along a warning if the line stirred. The new soldier did not like it. He looked at the men beside him, already folded into their corners, and then back at me. I knew what he was thinking. Why him? Why now? Why not sleep before the next order comes? Every man thought that at first. Later, after he had seen one bad night go wrong, he would stop asking the question so loudly. In a warm barracks, a sleeping room can be left alone. But in a winter trench, even sleeping men still needed someone awake enough to notice trouble. I told him that standing watch was not only about staring into the dark for an enemy shape. Sometimes it meant saving a man from his own tired body. If a sleeve slipped open, fix it or wake him. If a boot slid into water, move it. If a man's head dropped where snow could fall inside his collar, nudge him. If someone is shaking hard and not answering quickly, do not let pride keep him quiet. Wake another man if needed. He listened more carefully then. The idea of guarding against cold sounded strange to him, but his body had already learned enough to believe it. He had felt how small things turned worse. A wet sock, an open wrist, a cold canteen, a patch of damp cloth. Now he had to understand that a group could fail the same way a body did, by letting too many small problems go unseen. I had watched groups sleep too deeply before. Not from laziness, from pure exhaustion. Men leaned into each other, heads down, rifles close, and for a while it looked peaceful. Then the water spread under two packs. One man's blanket edge froze into the mud. Another woke with his feet numb and cursed everyone near him. No one had meant to let it happen. Everyone had only trusted sleep at the same time. A quiet man on watch could prevent more misery than a loud order at dawn. The new soldier took his turn with his coat tight and his hands hidden when he could. He did not look brave. He looked tired, resentful and cold. That was fine. A man did not need to look noble to be useful. He only needed to stay awake enough. He listened to breathing. He watched shoulders rise and fall. He checked the dark water at the trench bottom. Twice, he shifted his weight to keep his own feet from going stiff. At one point, the man beside him slid lower against the wall. The new soldier hesitated, then nudged him. The man grunted and tucked himself back into a better position. That was the lesson becoming real. Not in a speech, not in a command. In one tired hand, pushing another tired body away from a colder patch. Men did not survive winter nights as separate heroes. They survived because someone stayed awake when everyone else wanted to disappear. This was how the trench made a group out of men who would rather have been alone. One slept, one watched, one checked the water, one listened for movement, one noticed that a man had stopped answering clearly. There was no grand kindness in it. Just the plain fact that a sleeping group could lose warmth, order, and time before dawn arrived. The new soldier understood less with his mind than with his eyes. He saw how easy it was for sleeping men to become helpless shapes in the dark. He saw how quickly a small nudge could matter. He saw that the cold did not attack only skin and cloth, but attention. If no one was awake, the whole trench became slower. By the end of his watch, he no longer looked angry, only tired in a more serious way. He woke the next man, tucked his own hands close, checked his feet, and settled down with the knowledge that someone else would be watching for a while. That night taught him that sleep had to be shared carefully, not taken all at once. A group that let every man sink into the dark together could miss water, wind, snow, or a soldier growing too cold to answer quickly. Past that lesson waited another hard habit, because even while resting, every glove, rifle, canteen and coat edge had to stay close enough for a man awake and use it. During his next chance to rest, the new soldier tried to make the small space around him less painful. That was natural. He moved the rifle a little farther from his ribs. He pushed the canteen toward his pack so it would stop pressing into his side. He set one glove on top of a board, laid his rain cape near his knees, and shifted his helmet as if those few inches of space could turn the trench into something closer to sleep. I moved the rifle back first. He looked at me with the slow anger of a man who had been corrected too many times in one night. I understood that anger, but I did not return the rifle to bother him. A soldier could hate discomfort and still need it. In the trench, the things that kept a man alive had to stay close enough that his hand could find them before his mind was fully awake. Of course, the war was thoughtful enough to make every useful object hard, cold, sharp, or badly placed against the body. I told him to arrange the rifle beside his hand, not under his elbow and not across the mud. If he woke to a shout, he would not have time to search. If the rifle slid behind a pack, or lay beyond another man's knees, or rested where water could creep around it, those few seconds could become a problem. A new soldier thinks a weapon nearby is enough. An old soldier knows that nearby in daylight and reachable in darkness are not the same thing. Then I made him pull the glove back from the board. A glove looks small until it falls into mud. Once wet, it becomes another cold thing wrapped around the hand. If it freezes, the fingers suffer more. If it is lost, a man discovers how many tasks need touch: rifle bolt, strap, canteen, bootlace, collar, buckle, and the shoulder of another man who needs waking. One glove gone can make the whole morning harder. In a warm room today, a man can drop something beside the bed and find it later. But in that trench, the dark could turn a misplaced glove into a real punishment. He tucked the glove partly inside his coat, where it would stay dry and close. Then the canteen. I had already taught him to keep it near the body, but he had pushed it away for comfort. That was how small lessons slipped out of a tired man. I put it back where it could borrow warmth and still be reached. Not digging too hard into his ribs, not loose in the mud, close enough that a waking hand could know it by shape. The rain cape came next. He had put it near his knees, folded badly, one edge touching damp ground. If the wind shifted or snow fell harder, he would need it. If it lay out of reach, he would either leave it there and suffer, or stretch across another man in the dark and drag mud back into his own clothing. I told him to keep the useful edge turned toward him, wet edge away, drier edge ready. Nothing perfect, only ready. He sighed when I made him move the helmet closer to him. He wanted his head free for a moment. I told him freedom could wait until the war ended. The helmet did not need to be worn every second while resting if the situation allowed, but it could not be kicked into the darkness. Same with the pack, same with the dry scrap, same with the ratio, same with anything a man might need in the first breath after waking. A few yards away, a man woke suddenly and searched for his second glove. His hand moved over mud, board, sleeve and pack. He found it half under another man's boot, damp at the fingers. Nobody made a joke, it was too familiar. He pulled it on anyway, jaw tight, because the morning would not wait for dry wool. What I wanted the new soldier to understand was simple. The body may beg for comfort, but the night asks for readiness. There was no room for neat belongings. The trench was not a shelf, not a locker, not a bedside table. It swallowed things. Mud took straps, Snow-covered shapes. Darkness made every object resemble another object. A man who placed things carelessly before sleep often woke poorer than he had been, even if nothing had been stolen by another soldier. The trench itself did enough stealing. The new soldier arranged his little world again. Rifle near the hand, gloves tucked close, canteen against the body, raincape edge ready, a helmet that he could grab, pack placed to block a draft, but not bury the things inside it. The arrangement looked uncomfortable because it was. His elbow had less room, his side pressed against metal, his knees stayed bent, but if a shout came he would not have to build himself from nothing. A soldier did not rest by putting the war aside, he rested by keeping the war close enough to answer it. That was the part that made sleeping in a trench feel so unnatural. At home, a man removes weight before sleeping. Belt, boots, coat, tools, the hard things of the day. In the trench, he slept among them. He slept with edges against him, straps near his hand, a rifle close enough to disturb his shoulder, and gloves tucked where they would not vanish. Rest was never clean. It was crowded with whatever he needed to survive. The new soldier finally stopped moving things away from himself. He closed his eyes with his hand near the rifle and the canteen against his side. He was less comfortable than before, but better prepared. That was the bargain again. That night taught him that comfort could not be bought by pushing important things out of reach. A glove in the mud, a canteen too far away, a rain cape turned wrong, or a rifle beyond the hand could make waking harder when seconds mattered. Ahead of him was another quiet lesson, because the head, ears and neck needed guarding just as carefully as any weapon beside him. By the time the new soldier had his rifle close, his canteen near his side, and his gloves tucked where the mud could not steal them, he thought the arrangement was finished. He curled his knees in, tightened the coat around his chest, and settled his shoulders into the narrow space beside the trench wall. Like most new men, he protected the places that complained loudest. Chest, hands, feet, back. Those parts had already taught him enough pain for one night. Then, I pointed to his neck. He frowned because his coat was already pulled up. To him, that was enough. But the back of his neck still showed when he lowered his head. One ear was half exposed under the helmet rim. The cloth at his throat had shifted while he arranged the rifle. A new soldier often thinks the upper body is safe, as long as the chest is covered. The cold knows better. It finds the small soft places near the head and stays there. Of course, the night never needed much room, just one bare ear or a strip of neck left open long enough to make the whole body tighten. I made him lift the collar higher and tuck the edge under his chin. Then I had him pull a strip of cloth around the back of his neck. It was not a proper scarf. Nothing in that trench was proper by then. It was only a dirty piece of fabric, rough at the edge and stints where it had dried badly. Still, it covered skin. That was enough to make useful. He touched his ear next, surprised by how cold it felt. That happens often. A man can stop noticing his ears until pain comes sharply and late. The ears sit out in the wind, under a helmet that may stop fragments, but does not always stop cold. If the helmet is loose, air moves under it. If the cap beneath is damp, the chill stays close. If a man sleeps with one ear exposed, he wakes again and again without knowing why his whole body refuses to settle. In a warm bed today, a cold ear might only make a man turn the pillow, but in that trench it could keep the body tense for hours. I told him to use whatever he had, cap lower, helmet settled but not cutting into him, collar high, cloth at the neck, hands near the chest, not up by the face, unless they were protected. Do not breathe damp air into the cloth until it freezes stiff against the mouth. Do not wrap so tightly that turning the head becomes hard. Cover the skin, but stay able to move. Every answer in the trench had a second problem waiting behind it. He adjusted badly at first. The cloth slipped. The collar opened when he lowered his chin. The helmet pushed one side loose. I made him fix it again. He was too tired to hide his irritation. But I had seen enough men lose warmth from the upper body to ignore it. A cold neck does not stay a small complaint. It makes the shoulders rise, the back stiffen, the jaw clench, and the rest of the body work harder. Soon, the man curls tighter, presses into worse positions, and opens another gap somewhere else. A few men down, an older soldier had wrapped a rag around his neck so poorly that he looked almost foolish. One side of it sat higher than the other, and the knot was ugly, but his ears were covered. His collar stayed closed, and his head was turned away from the moving air. He would sleep badly, but he would lose less warmth. That was the usual victory. The new soldier watched him and stopped caring how his own wrapping looked. That was good. Vanity died slowly in some men, quickly in others. The cold helped with that. Once a man understood that an ugly strip of cloth could save warmth, he stopped worrying whether he looked like a proper soldier. He started worrying whether he could still move his fingers when called. A head left poorly covered can make a man feel colder than he expects. Not because one part controls everything like magic, but because discomfort spreads. Cold ears wake him, a cold neck tightens him, a cold throat makes him pull into himself. He sleeps worse, moves more, opens his coat, shifts the pack, exposes the wrists, and loses what other careful work had saved. One weak point ruins the arrangement. A man learned to respect any place the cold could touch. That was why old soldiers shit from the top down before sleeping. Helmet, cap, ears, neck, collar, then wrists, waist, ankles, and feet. Not because we enjoyed rules, but because the body was a poor little fire, and the upper openings let too much of its comfort disappear. In cold trenches, the difference between misery and worse misery was sometimes the width of a collar. The new soldier finally settled again with his neck covered, and both ears protected as well as the night allowed. He looked cramped, bundled, and older than he had looked at dusk. His eyes had lost the look of a man waiting for comfort. Now he was waiting for the morning. That was closer to the truth. No officer would mention his ear in a report. No map would show the collar pulled higher against the wind. But those things mattered inside the dark, where one body had to last until another order came. That night covering the chesset was not enough. A bare neck, cold ear, loose collar, or exposed strip beneath the helmet could keep the whole body tense and restless for hours. Past that small protection waited the harder truth about fire, because the warmth every soldier wanted most could also be the thing that gave his position away. Fire was the first answer that came into a new soldier's mind when the cold became too much. I saw it in his face after he had checked his collar, covered his ears, tucked his hands, and settled into the narrow space again. His eyes moved toward the darker corner of the trench, where broken boards, scraps of paper, and bits of packing straw lay half buried in mud. He did not say it, but I knew what he wanted. A small flame, a little heat. Something bright enough to make the night feel less endless. I told him not to think that way. He looked at me with disbelief. To him, fire meant survival. Men had warmed themselves by fire longer than any army had existed, and here we were, sitting in winter mud, pretending that a match and dry scrap were more dangerous than cold hands. That was how a new man saw it. He saw the need first. He did not yet see what the flame could give away. Of course, the one thing that could make a man feel human again could also announce exactly where that human was hiding. A small flame was still a flame. Light leaked through cracks. Smoke rose even when a man believed it would not. Heat could show where men had gathered. Sparks could climb. The smell of burning cloth, paper, or damp wood could travel. The enemy did not need a great bonfire to notice carelessness. Sometimes one glow in the wrong place was enough to bring attention none of us wanted. I made him look along the trench. No man had a proper fire. No one sat with open hands toward a flame like in a picture of camp life. Men were hunched into themselves, using coats, bags, scraps, bodies, and broken corners. That was not because they did not want fire. Every man there wanted it. Wanting was not the same as being allowed to survive the wanting. In a peaceful winter today, fire means comfort, but in that trench, fire could mean light, smoke, and a reason for someone far away to aim. So I repeated the quieter methods. Lift yourself off the ground, block the wind, keep the inner layer dry, brush the snow before it melts, eat a little, keep water near the body, cover neck, wrists, ankles, and ears, stay close enough to other men when possible. Curl the body without trapping wet cloth. None of these things felt as satisfying as flame. That was the problem. The safer answers were dull, dirty, and slow. The new soldier looked disappointed in a tired, almost childish way. I did not hold that against him. Cold makes adults want simple comfort. A fire is easy to understand. A layer of straw under the hip is not. A closed cuff does not lift the spirit. A dry sock does not glow. But those quiet things did not point us out in the dark. I remembered a night when some men farther along the line tried to hide a tiny fire behind a broken panel. They believed the wall was enough. Maybe it was for a while. Then a shift of wind carried the smoke badly, and someone ordered it killed at once. The men were angry. Their hands had only just begun to feel alive. But nobody argued for long, because every man understood fear behind the order. A warm hand was not worth bringing shells down on sleeping bodies. A soldier learned to distrust comfort when comfort wanted to shine. The new soldier rubbed his palms together and looked away from the scraps of straw. He was beginning to understand that the night would not give him the kind of warmth he wanted. It would give him only tasks. Arrange this, cover that, move closer, eat now. Sip carefully, check the canteen, keep the rifle near, wake lightly. Take your turn watching. Survival was made of chores, not comfort. This was one of the plain cruelties of the front. Men could freeze within sight of things that might burn. They could carry matches and still not use them. They could see wood and paper, and know that turning them into heat might turn the trench into a target. War not only denied warmth by removing it, sometimes it placed warmth in front of a man and made it dangerous to touch. Along the trench, old soldiers used their bodies like poor little stoves. They pressed their shoulders near shoulders. They tucked their hands under their arms. They kept water close and feet protected. They used packs as windbreaks and scraps as ground layers. It was not heroic. It was not clever in a grand way. It was just quieter than fire. The cold made men dream of flames, but experience taught them to trust the things that did not glow. The new soldier finally settled back without asking about fire again. That was enough. He still wanted it. So did I. Every man there wanted a flame, a stove, a lamp, a room, a place where smoke could rise without fear. But wanting those things had no use in that trench. The night had to be handled with what could be hidden. I told him to remember that a safe warmth was better than an obvious one. If he found shelter from the wind, use it. If he found a dry rag, protect it. If another man's shoulder helped keep the heat between them, accept it. If food remains, eat a little. If water could be kept from freezing, keep it close. Fire was not a plan. Fire was a risk that sometimes could not be taken. He closed his eyes again, still cold, but less foolish at what could save him. The trench remained dark, which was part of why we were still alive. That night taught him that the warmth he wanted most was not always the warmth he could use. A small fire might comfort cold fingers, but light, smoke and heat could give the whole position away before morning. Beyond that came the larger lesson. Because an old soldier did not defeat the cold, he only closed as many little doors against it as he could. By then, the new soldier had collected enough small lessons to feel almost burdened by them. Check the ground. Lift the back, turn from the wind, curl the body, guard the feet, keep the boots on, save dry socks, brush away snow, watch sweat, stay near other men, keep the inner layer dry, close the gaps, eat a little, keep water near, sleep lightly. Do not let every man sleep at once. Keep the rifle, gloves, coat and canteen clothes, cover the head and neck. Do not trust fire. He looked at me as if all of it was too much. I understood that look. Every new soldier wants one large answer. Be tough. Be brave. Endure. Do not complain. Hold on until morning. Those words sound strong because they are simple. But winter did not care about simple words. Cold did not ask whether a man had courage before it entered through wet socks, loose cuffs, damp shirts, frozen ground, open collars, empty stomachs, and a careless sleeping place. Of course, it would have been easier if bravery alone could dry a sock, warm a canteen, and block the wind. I told him that old soldiers did not beat the cold. That was the wrong way to think. We only made it work harder. We gave it fewer openings. We slowed it down. We stopped one mistake before it joined another. A wet sock could be managed. A cold back could be managed. An open collar could be managed. A hungry belly could be managed. But put them together, and the body began losing the argument without one dramatic moment. He looked down at himself then. Boots loosened but still on. Socks checked, collar up. Wrists covered, canteen near the ribs, rifle close. Body turned from the draft, sack under the hip. It did not look like a victory. It looked like a tired man arranged badly among mud and cloth. But that was what survival often looked like. Not strong, not proud, just less wrong than before. In a warm life today, one small discomfort can be fixed separately. But in that trench, every small mistake joins the others and makes the whole body weaker. I made him think through the chain. If the ground soaked his coat, he would move more. If he moved more, the collar might open. If the collar opened, the wind would find his neck. If his feet were wet, he would curl too tightly and stop checking them. If he skipped food, his shaking would come sooner. If the canteen froze, thirst would make his head duller. If the rifle was too far away, walking became slower. Each thing fed the next. That was how the cold won. Not by one clean blow, by patience. It waited for tired men to stop caring about details. It waited for one wet place, one loose edge, one bad habit, one lazy decision after work. Then it joined them together until the man could no longer tell which mistake had made him so cold. A soldier sitting in darkness can think he is only uncomfortable. That is the dangerous part. He tells himself everyone is cold. Everyone is wet, everyone is tired, all true. But one man has closed more openings than another, and by morning that difference appears in the way he stands, grips, answers and moves. The new soldier watched the line more carefully after that. Some men sat better arranged than others. One had his pack blocking the draft, but his ankle was exposed. Another kept his collar tight, but had let a glove slip into wet mud. A third had covered himself with too much damp cloth. Nobody was safe from mistakes. The old soldiers only caught more of them before the night did. A young man often thinks endurance means doing nothing and suffering quietly. The trench taught the opposite. Endurance was active. It meant fixing the cuff again, moving the pack, checking the sock, eating the last hard bite at the right time, shaking snow from the collar, waking the man beside you, refusing a tempting fire, keeping useful things within reach even when they are pressed into the ribs. The body did not lose all at once. It gave ground slowly, and that was why a man had to defend it slowly too. I told him not to be ashamed of these small acts. War liked to dress men in uniforms and talk about strength, but a winter trench reduced strength to very plain work. Keep dry where possible. Stay off the wet earth. Guard the feet. Close the openings. Share warmth. Do not waste food or water. Do not trust comfort if it brings danger with it. There was no glory in it. A man could do everything right and still be cold. He could still shake. He could still wake tired. He could still hate the night. The point was not to feel well. The point was to give the cold fewer ways to make him useless before dawn. The new soldier finally nodded, not because he liked the lesson, but because he had begun to see the shape of it. Surviving the night was not a one-trick pony. It was a pile of small refusals, refusing wet ground, refusing open wind, refusing numb feet, refusing easy fire, refusing to sleep too deeply, refusing to let the night choose for him. That night taught him that the cold was not defeated by toughness alone. It came through every wet, open, empty, careless place a soldier left for it, and too many small mistakes could weaken a body before anyone noticed the turn. Past that truth waited the longer punishment, because one bitter night could be survived, but many nights in a row could wear a man down in ways no single dawn could repair. One cold night can make a new soldier proud if he survives it. I saw that the young man had even come before dawn. He had learned to keep his boots on, protect his socks, close his collar, keep the canteen near and sleep in broken pieces. He was still miserable, but a little part of him believed that if he could pass this night, he had solved the problem. I told him not to think that way. He looked at me with tired confusion. To him, the night was the enemy in front of him. Get through this one, then think about the next one later. That is how new men protect their minds. They narrow the world down to the next hour, the next order, the next chance to sit. There is some sense in that. A man cannot carry the whole war in his head, but winter carried it for him. One night of cold could be endured. Several nights began to spend differently. Of course, the trench was patient enough to let a man feel victorious once before making him repeat the same misery. I told him to save what he could. Do not use the dry sock too early if the old one can be improved with a scrap. Do not eat every sweet piece because the mouth wants comfort. Do not let the inner shirt get wetter for a few minutes of careless warmth. Do not throw away a damp cloth because it offends you now. Do not burn useful paper unless the order and the risk allow it. Tomorrow night will ask questions too. He did not like hearing that. Nobody did. A new soldier wants each small comfort immediately because the body is shouting now. Tight boot, cold hand, empty stomach, wet cuff, hard ground. The future feels unreal when the present is already cruel. But the men who lived longer learned to think in several nights at once. Not because they were wise by nature, but because the front punished men who spent everything on 1 hour. In ordinary life, a man can use all his comfort at night and expect the morning to refill it. But in that trench, morning often gave back nothing dry, nothing warm, and nothing easy. I pointed to the socks tucked inside his coat. One dry piece left, that had to matter. If he wasted it now, tomorrow he might have none. I pointed to the ration, a little saved. Not enough for happiness, but enough to help the body later. I pointed to the coat. Keep the inner layer from getting wetter. He had to think of dry cloth the way other men thought of money. Spend it only when the need is real. The worst part of many cold nights was not one terrible pain. It was the adding up. Feet rubbed raw, then walked again. Socks are damp, then never fully dry. A back stiff from one night, then pressed into boards the next. Hands were clumsy from yesterday, then asked to work before dawn. Sleep broken once, then broken again, then broken so often that a man forgot what full rest felt like. Hunger did the same, so did fear. A soldier can hide weakness for one morning. He can joke, curse, stand and pretend the night did not damage him. But the third or fourth morning tells the truth. The eyes become dull, the movement slow, the temper shortens. A man drops things, forgets checks, leaves a glove exposed, fails to eat at the right time, and then the next night becomes harder because he began it already behind. Years later, what stayed with me was not one freezing night, but the way many small nights made men older without anyone naming the change. The new soldier listened more quietly. He had seen enough tired faces around him to believe it. Men did not look ruined all at once. They looked used, a little more grey at dawn, a little slower when cold, a little less willing to speak. Their bodies still moved, but the movement had lost something. Winter did not always break a man loudly. It wore him down until the smallest task asked too much. That was why old soldiers protected dull little resources, a dry scrap, a biscuit saved, a canteen kept drinks drinkable, a coat not made wetter than necessary, a good corner remembered, a habit repeated even when the mind was sick of habits. These things were not only for one night, they were for the night after it, and the one after that if the line did not move. I told him that endurance was not spending everything to feel better now. It was keeping enough of itself usable for the next cold hour. That meant saying no to comfort sometimes, no to taking boots off for relief, no to eating all the chocolate, no to wrapping a wet cloth tightly, no to sleeping so deeply that water could rise under him, no to pretending one successful night made him safe. A young soldier wants the war to come in separate pieces. The front does not work that way. He settled with fewer complaints after that. Not because he was stronger, but because he understood the need to save. He tucked the dry sock more carefully. He left a bite of the ration. He checked the coat edge before closing it. He placed the canteen where it could stay usable. Those small acts made him look almost old for a moment, though he was not. The trench could do that to a face. One night had taught him many things. Many nights would test whether he could keep doing them when tiredness became heavier than fear. That night taught him that surviving once was not the same as being ready for winter. Several cold nights in a row could turn wet cloth, sore feet, hunger and broken sleep into a slow weakness that no single morning could fix. The dawn brought its own test, because the end of the night did not mean the body was ready to stand, move, and obey. Dawn made the new soldier think the night had ended. I saw it in his face when the dark began to thin above the trench wall. The sky was still grey, the mud was still hard in places, and his breath still came out pale in front of him, but light gave him a little hope. New men often believed that morning itself would repair them. They thought that if they had survived the dark, the body would somehow return to them with the first colour in the sky. I told him not to trust dawn too quickly. He looked at me with tired eyes. He had passed the night. He had kept his boots on, guarded his socks, closed his collar, saved a little food, kept his canteen near, slept lightly, and taken his turn watching the others. In his mind, that should have meant the hardest part was done. But a winter trench did not end its work just because the horizon had become visible. Of course, morning was kind enough to arrive without bringing warm feet, dry sleeves, or hands that could move properly. I told him to test his body before the order came. Move the toes first, not after standing. Now, feel whether they answered. Flex the fingers inside the gloves. Shift the shoulders. Check whether the coat had frozen stiff where the damp cloth met the cold air. Make sure the rifle was not lying in the mud. Shake the canteen, touch the bootlaces, look at the place where the hip had rested. A man who waited until the shout came would learn too late what the night had done. He moved slowly. His toes answered, but not well. One foot was duller than the other. His fingers worked, though the glove felt heavy and damp at the edge. His coat had stiffened near the hem. His rifle was close, but cold enough that touching it made his hand tighten. He did not complain. He was beginning to understand that the complaint changed nothing. The important thing was whether the body and the equipment could still be used. In a warm life today, waking up stiff means taking a few minutes before the day begins, but in that trench, the day could begin before a man had properly found his own hands. I made him rise halfway before he stood fully. Too fast, and the legs might fail him. Too slow, and the line might move without him. He hated that careful middle place. Every tired man does. But morning in the trench needed the same discipline as night. Do not leap up like a fool. Do not sit there waiting for comfort. Wake the feet, wake the fingers, gather the things, find the rifle, fix the collar, keep the gloves, drink only if the water is still moving, save what remains. Around us, men were doing the same quiet work. Nobody looked rested. They looked pulled from the mud. One man slapped his hands together inside his gloves. Another forced his bootlace loose where it had stiffened. Someone shook a canteen and cursed softly at the dull sound inside. Another man bent over his rifle, wiping away wet grit before it became a worse problem. This was morning, not a rescue. The new soldier watched them with a face that had changed from the night before. He no longer looked for one clear end to suffering. He saw how the night carried itself into the day. Wet socks did not dry because the light appeared. A hungry belly did not become full. A cold rifle did not become easy to hold. A stiff back did not forgive the ground. The dawn only revealed what had been happening in the dark. I had seen men survive the night and fail the first hour after it. They had stayed alive, but their hands were too slow. Their feet would not trust the ground. Their gear had drifted out of reach. Their coat had frozen into a bad fold. Their canteen was ice. They were not dead, but they had lost the quickness that war demanded. Sometimes that was enough to put them in danger before the sun was properly up. A man could make it through the cold and still be late to his own body in the morning. That was why everything before sleep mattered. The rifle is closed. The gloves are dry enough. The boots are still on. The laces are not strangling the feet. The socks checked. The canteen was guarded. The coat was arranged so it would not freeze in the worst shape. The pack was placed where it blocked the wind, but did not bury the needed things. These were not separate lessons. They all met at dawn. The old soldiers did not prepare for sleep only to survive the night. They prepared so morning would not find them useless. The new soldier finally stood, not well but standing. He bent once, picked up his rifle without searching, checked the canteen by feel, and pressed his toes against the inside of the boots. His face showed pain, but also attention. That was better than pride. Pride made a man pretend. Attention helped him move. The trench was beginning to stir. Orders would come soon, or work, or waiting that felt like work. Men would climb, carry, dig, watch, or shift position, as if they had slept like ordinary people. No one would ask whether the night had been fair to their feet, backs, fingers, or lungs. The war only asked whether they could move. The new soldier looked back at the place where he had spent the night. It was only a poor corner, with pressed straw, a sack, muddy boards, and the mark of his body in the dirt. It had not been a bed, it had been a bargain. He had given up comfort in exchange for being able to stand. That morning taught him that dawn did not erase the cold. It only exposed what the cold had taken. A soldier had to wake with boots, gloves, a rifle, water, and a body still usable, because being alive was not enough if he could not move. The last lesson was larger than any single trick, because the men who survived trench sleep did not master winter. They turned every small habit into a routine that carried them to the next morning. By the time the new soldier stood through that grey morning, he no longer looked at sleep the same way. At the start of the night, he had thought sleep meant finding any empty place, lowering his body, and escaping the cold for a while. By morning, he understood that nothing in a winter trench worked that simply. Sleep had become a job, and if a man did it badly, the cold corrected him before dawn. I told him that no one survived because the trench was warm. It was not warm. The boards were cold, the mud was wet, the walls leaked wind, snow found sleeves, collars, boots, and blankets. Canteens froze, socks stayed damp, fingers stiffened, and backs pressed against the ground that took heat without hurry. No one survived because he was made of stronger flesh than men now. Flesh is flesh. It goes numb, shakes, tires, and fails. Of course, the cold never asked whether a man was brave before taking the warmth out of his feet. What kept men alive was the habit of slowing the cold down, not stopping it. A young soldier wants victory over discomfort. An old soldier wants to delay. Put something under the back, turn away from the wind, keep the collar closed, check the wrists, guard the ankles. Keep the boots on unless the foot truly needs treatment, save dry socks near the body, brush snow away before it melts. Do not wrap a wet cloth tightly against the skin. Eat a little. Sip carefully, keep the canteen closed, sleep lightly. Let one man watch while others rest. None of those things looked grand. A torn sack under the hip did not look like survival. A dry scrap of cloth inside the coat did not look like wisdom. A man tucking his wrist under a sleeve did not look like strength. But war is not always survived by large acts. Sometimes it is survived by not making several small mistakes at once. In a warm room today, these habits may sound like discomfort, but in that trench, They were the difference between resting badly and waking too slow to use your own body. The new soldier had learned that the body could not be bullied into warmth. He could not clench his teeth and demand that his feet work in the morning. He could not tell wet socks to stop stealing heat. He could not order a frozen canteen to give water. He could not wish a damp cloth dry. The body had rules, and winter enforced them without anger. I had seen men learn too late. One slept in the low place and woke soaked at the hip. One took off a boot for comfort and fought to put it back on at dawn. One kept a wet blanket close because it felt heavy enough to help. One left a glove in the mud. One saved food too carefully and shook through the last part of the night with nothing inside him, none meant to be foolish. The old soldiers were not better men. They were simply men who had already paid for bad decisions. They had woken stiff, numb, thirsty, slow, and ashamed enough times to stop trusting comfort too quickly. That was why they seemed hard on the new ones. They pulled a man up when he wanted to sit. They made him move aboard. They told him to check his feet. They stopped him from chasing fire. They made him keep ugly little things close. A trench did not turn sleep into peace. It turned sleep into small protections. That was the lesson I wanted the new soldier to carry past that first night. Do not admire suffering. Do not believe freezing quietly makes you stronger. Do not think a man survives because he complains less. The better soldier is not the one who pretends cold is nothing. The better soldier is the one who prepares before his hands fail, before his thinking slows, before the body gives him no second chance. The plain truth was that an old soldier did not defeat winter. He only learned how to deny it easy openings. When morning came, the men did not rise refreshed. They rose usable, boots still on, rifle close. Water is not fully frozen, feet not good but moving, hands not warm but working, clothes not dry but arranged, bodies not rested but alive enough to answer. That was how Wolju soldiers slept in trenches without freezing to death. They turned sleep into a survival routine until the habit became almost automatic. For the new soldier, that knowledge was useful, not comforting. Comfort would have lied to him. Usefulness might keep him alive. He had entered the night wanting one soft place to collapse. He left it knowing that every cold hour had to be managed. Every piece of cloth mattered. Every small gap had a cost. And every dawn asked whether the body could still move. The lesson from those winter trenches is not that men of the past were tougher than we are. It is that they were forced to learn how fragile a body becomes when sleep, cold, hunger, wet cloth, and fear all press on it together. They lived because one tired man taught another, and because survival came down to ugly habits no one would notice from far away. This is where the cold night in the trench comes to rest. The new soldier has learned enough to close his eyes with more care, and the old soldier has passed on what pain taught him. Sleep well, stay warm, and good night.